In the heart of a lawless Texas town, one man's defiance against cruelty sparks a journey of redemption. Will a broken girl and a grieving rancher find a family, or will the past tear them apart? The Texas sun hung low in the sky, a molten disk bleeding crimson across the endless prairie. It was the summer of 1874, and Red Hollow, a ragged speck of a town carved into the scrubland, shimmered in the heat. Its single street, churned to dust by hooves and wagon wheels, led to the Double Spur Saloon, where the air reeked of stale whiskey, tobacco, and broken dreams. Laughter spilled from its swinging doors, sharp and jagged, mingling with the clink of glasses and the shuffle of cards. Behind the saloon, in a shadowed alley strewn with broken bottles and cigarette stubs, a girl stood bound to a weathered fence post, her small frame trembling under the weight of her own silence. Lena was 12, though her gaunt cheeks and hollow eyes made her seem younger, as if life had stolen years she hadn't yet lived. Her auburn hair, tangled and dulled by sweat, clung to her forehead, and her muslin dress, once white, now a patchwork of dirt and tears, hung like wet parchment against her thin body. Coarse rope bit into her wrists, tied high above her head, leaving red welts that burned with every flinch. Mud caked her bare feet, oozing between her toes, and her breath came in shallow gasps, as if she feared drawing too much attention. She didn't cry, didn't beg. Her gaze stayed fixed on the cracked earth as if it held answers no one else could see. A crowd had gathered, not for her, but for the saloon's promises, card games, cheap liquor, and the fleeting comfort of the girls upstairs. They were drifters with sun-cracked lips, ranch hands with calloused hands, and gamblers with eyes like vultures. Lena was just a sideshow, a grim curiosity in a town where morality was as scarce as rain. "Gambler's kid," one man muttered, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Her pa's debts are deeper than the Red River. She's the collateral." Another laughed, low and cruel, tossing a pebble that skittered past her feet. No one asked her name. No one cared. Caleb Dawes stood apart, leaning against a splintered hitching post, his lean frame draped in a black duster that smelled of stale smoke. Brother to Lena's father, a man long vanished into the haze of cards and debt. Caleb chewed jerky with a smirk, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd like a predator sizing up prey. His voice sliced through the murmurs, coarse as gravel. $12, 1 week's labor, or keep her permanent. She's scrawny, but she'll scrub floors, mend clothes. Don't eat much. He tugged the rope, making Lena stumble, her knees buckling before she caught herself. Dumb as a post, too. Won't talk back. The crowd shifted, some turning away, their boots scuffing the dirt. It was too raw, too ugly, even for Red Hollow's hardened souls. A few men muttered curses, others leered with a hunger that made the air feel heavier, but most lost interest, drawn back to the saloon's flickering lanterns. Lena's head stayed bowed, her auburn curls falling like a curtain over her face, hiding eyes that had stopped expecting mercy. Then, a low rumble broke the stillness. Hooves on the dry trail. Dust swirled as a rider emerged from the haze, tall and steady in the saddle, his silhouette framed against the dying sun. Jesse James, 40 years old, carried the weight of a man who'd buried his heart with his wife 5 winters ago. His worn hat cast a shadow over a face etched with lines of grief and grit, and his frayed coat, patched at the elbows, hung loose over shoulders broad from years of wrestling the land. His eyes, a piercing gray, held a quiet intensity, like a storm waiting to break. He wasn't bound for Red Hollow that day, just passing through to trade a sack of rusted tools for grain at the general store. But as he neared the saloon, his mare, a chestnut named Juniper, slowed, her ears twitching as if she felt the wrongness in the air. Jesse's gaze caught Lena, a frail figure against the fence post, her trembling arms barely holding her upright. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his stubbled cheek. He dismounted, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud, and tied Juniper to a post, his movements deliberate, unhurried. The crowd parted slightly, sensing a shift, but Caleb's smirk didn't falter. He sauntered forward, rope in hand, and yanked it again, making Lena wince. "What's your bid, stranger? She's a bargain." Cleans, cooks a bit, stronger than she looks. Jesse didn't answer. His eyes stayed on Lena, taking in her blistered wrists, her sunken cheeks, the way she stood like a bird too broken to fly. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small leather pouch, its contents clinking softly. $15. He said, voice low but carrying the weight of iron. He tossed the pouch into the dust at Caleb's feet. The gambler's eyes narrowed, glinting with greed. Weak or permanent? Permanent, Jesse replied, his tone flat but unwavering. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over Lena. But I ain't buying her, I'm settling your debt, she walks free. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Caleb's smirk twisted into a sneer, but he scooped up the pouch, weighing it in his palm. Same difference, mister. He tossed the rope into the dirt, spitting to the side. She's yours. Good luck. She's more trouble than she's worth. Jesse ignored him. He knelt before Lena, his pocket knife gleaming as he sliced through the ropes with one swift cut. Her arms fell limp and shaking, and she staggered, her knees buckling. Jesse caught her, his hand steady on her shoulder, not tender but firm, like a man who knew the world's cruelty and refused to add to it. Lena's eyes, wide and wary, met his for a fleeting moment, then darted away, as if kindness were a trick she'd learned to distrust. Can you walk? He asked, voice softer now. She nodded, her lips pressed tight. He led her to Juniper, lifting her onto the saddle with care, her small frame light as a bundle of kindling. He tied the reins to his mule, a stubborn beast named Rusty, and climbed onto its back. Without a word, they rode out of Red Hollow, the saloon's raucous laughter fading into the wind. The prairie stretched endless before them, bathed in the last embers of daylight. Lena clung to the saddle horn, her knuckles white, her auburn hair catching the breeze. She didn't look back at the town, but her silence carried a weight heavier than words. Jesse kept his eyes on the horizon, his heart pounding with a question he couldn't voice. What do you do with a child who's never known a home? The Texas night unfurled like a heavy quilt, stars piercing the velvet sky above Jesse James's ranch, 10 miles west of Red Hollow. It was 1874, and the prairie whispered with the rustle of cottonwoods, their bare branches clawing at the moonlight. The ranch was a patchwork of neglect. A sagging barn, a splintered fence, and a main house that creaked under the weight of too many lonely winters. Jesse led Lena, 12 and frail as a sparrow, through the gate, her auburn hair catching the faint glow of a lantern he carried. Her muslin dress, still damp with sweat and mud, clung to her thin frame, and her bare feet left shallow prints in the frost-kissed dirt. She hadn't spoken since they left town, her silence a shield against a world that had offered her little but pain. Inside the house, the air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and simmering beans. A single room held a scarred table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot by a stone fireplace, its embers pulsing like a weary heart. Jesse set the lantern down, its light casting long shadows across the plank floor. He pointed to the cot, a folded wool blanket atop it. That's yours, he said, voice gruff but not unkind. Lena froze, her wide eyes darting from the blanket to Jesse as if waiting for a trap. You hungry? He asked. She nodded once, barely moving, her hands clasped tight to keep from trembling. Jesse ladled beans from a blackened pot into a dented tin bowl, setting it on the table with a spoon. Lena sat, her movements cautious like a deer stepping into open ground. She stared at the steaming food, her fingers hovering over the spoon but not touching it. You don't gotta eat it fast, Jesse said, softer now, leaning against the wall to give her space. Lena picked up the spoon, her grip unsteady, and took a small bite. Her face flinched, not from heat, but from the unfamiliar warmth of a meal served without a price. She ate slowly, each bite deliberate, as if savoring something she feared might vanish. Jesse watched, pretending he didn't, his gray eyes tracing the way her shoulders hunched, the way she glanced at the door like it might lock itself. He'd seen broken things before. Horses, fences, his own heart after his wife's fever took her. But Lena was different. She was a child, yet her silence carried the weight of years stolen by cruelty. He cleared his throat. "I don't lock doors here. You're safe." Lena's eyes flicked up wary, searching his face for a lie. Finding none, she nodded, but her body stayed tense, coiled like a spring. She spoke then, her voice a whisper, thin as a reed. "Don't put me in the barn, please." The words hit Jesse like a fist, stirring memories of his own. Nights spent hiding from a father's belt, the sting of being less than wanted. He crouched to her level, keeping his distance. No barns, no chains, just that cot, and you sleep when you're ready. Lena's lips parted, but no sound came. She clutched the spoon tighter, her knuckles white. Jesse stepped outside to unhitch Rusty the mule, leaving Lena alone with the fire's glow. The night was sharp, coyotes howling beyond the ridge, their cries threading through the wind. He lingered by the barn, staring at the stars, their cold light offering no answers. What had he done bringing a child into a life as cracked as his own? The ranch was no place for a girl, leaking roof, empty larder, and a man who barely knew how to mend himself, let alone another soul. Yet something in Lena's hollow gaze had stopped him in Red Hollow, a mirror to the emptiness he'd carried too long. Back inside, Lena was curled on the cot, the blanket pulled tight around her, her auburn curls spilling over the edge. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were open, fixed on the fire as if it might betray her if she looked away. Jesse settled into a chair, his rifle propped nearby, not for her but for the world outside. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and Lena's gaze darted to him, then back to the flames. "Thank you," she murmured. So soft he almost missed it, her voice like a secret she wasn't sure she could share. He nodded, stirring the fire with a poker, sparks rising like fleeting hopes. "Get some rest," he said. "Morning comes quick." But sleep didn't come for either of them. Lena lay still, arms wrapped around herself, as if guarding against ghosts only she could see. Jesse stayed awake, the rifle a cold comfort, his mind turning over a truth he couldn't shake. Saving her from the rope was the easy part. What came next, building trust in a heart that had forgotten how, was a battle he wasn't sure he could win. As dawn's first light crept through the window, painting the room in shades of gray, Lena stirred, her eyes meeting Jesse's across, the quiet. In that moment, a fragile thread of understanding passed between them. But what would it take to make this broken place feel like home? Dawn broke over the Texas prairie, a soft blush of pink and gold spilling across the rolling scrubland. It was 1874, and Jesse James's ranch stood quiet under the early light, its weathered barn sagging like an old friend too tired to stand straight. Cottonwoods whispered in the morning breeze, their bare branches swaying against a sky still dappled with fading stars. Inside the main house, the fire had dwindled to ash, but the warmth lingered, curling around Lena like a hesitant embrace. The 12-year-old sat on the edge of her cot, quilt slipping to the floor, her auburn curls tangled from a restless night. Her muslin dress, now washed but patched, hung loose on her slight frame, and her bare feet brushed the plank floor, wary of making a sound. Jesse was already outside, his silhouette sharp against the horizon as he split kindling by the shed. His frayed jacket hung from one shoulder, and each swing of the axe sent a crisp crack echoing through the canyon. He hadn't woken Lena, no bell, no shout, but she rose anyway, driven by a rhythm carved from years of guessing what might spare her punishment. She stepped to the porch, hesitating at the threshold, her green eyes scanning the yard. The frost glistened on the grass, and the air carried the sharp bite of early spring. She didn't move forward, didn't ask to help, just stood, as if waiting for permission to exist. Jesse glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow, and jerked his chin toward the chicken coop. "Hens need feeding. Corn's in the sack by the door." Lena nodded, her movements quick but silent, and padded across the yard, her toes sinking into the cold earth. She scattered grain with careful handfuls, her hands red from the chill, bits of straw catching in her skirt. The hens clucked and pecked, their chaos a stark contrast to her stillness. When she returned, Jesse was stacking wood, his breath visible in the crisp air. He half expected a complaint about the cold or the work. Lena offered none, just sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, her gaze fixed on the dirt road winding east, as if someone might come to drag her back to Red. Hollow breakfast broke the silence. Jesse's weekly bread, a dense loaf more stone than sustenance, sat on the table, its crust cracked but warm. He sliced it with a knife, setting a piece on Lena's plate beside a smear of honey from a chipped jar. "Eat," he said, pouring coffee into a tin mug, his eyes on the window, pretending not to watch her. Lena's fingers hovered over the bread, trembling slightly as if it might vanish. "All of it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper, her green eyes wide with disbelief. Jesse paused, his mug halfway to his lips. "That's what it's for," he said, voice softer than he meant. She tore off a small piece, holding it to her lips, then hesitated. "Should I save some?" Jesse leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "There'll be more tomorrow." Lena's gaze lingered on him, searching for a catch, but found only the steady gray of his eyes. She ate slowly, the honey's sweetness drawing a flicker of surprise across her face, a fleeting glimpse of a child beneath the scars. Jesse sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him as he wrestled with the truth. She didn't know what to do with kindness, and he didn't know how to give it without breaking something. As days folded into a week, a fragile routine took root. Lena trailed Jesse as he mended fences, her small steps matching his longer strides, though she stumbled over rocks and roots. When she skinned her knee on a jagged stone, blood welling bright against her pale skin, she gritted her teeth and kept walking. Jesse stopped, pulling a rag from his pocket. "Ain't no shame in hurting," he said, handing it to her. She wiped the blood in silence, her nod barely perceptible, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. One evening, Lena lingered by the barn, her fingers tracing the weathered wood of a gate. Jesse caught her there, curled beneath a wheelbarrow, not hiding but checking, her eyes on the latch. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low. "Seeing if it locks," she whispered, barely audible. He crouched beside her, the dirt cool under his knees. "Nothing locks here. Not doors. Not you." She didn't answer. But the next night she moved her cot closer to the fire, the blanket draped loose as if testing the truth of his words. The first sign of change came unexpectedly. Lena swept the floor twice daily, though it gleamed after the first. She scrubbed the stove until her knuckles bled, folding her quilt with precision that spoke of fear, not habit. Jesse tried to tell her to rest, but her eyes widened, bracing for a blow that never came. One morning, she left a wilted blue bonnet on the unmarked grave behind the barn, Jesse's wife's resting place, a stone smoothed by time. He found it at dusk, the flower crushed but deliberate, a quiet offering. "You miss someone?" he asked that night, stirring beans over the fire. Lena's voice was small. "I had a brother. Once." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press, but the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken stories. By the week's end, a neighbor's voice broke their solitude. Hank Sutter, a grizzled rancher with a limp, paused at the gate, his horse snorting in the heat. "Who's the girl?" he asked, squinting at Lena as she hauled water from the well. Jesse's answer was curt. "None of your concern." Hank raised a brow. "Strange is all." Jesse's eyes hardened. "Strange don't mean wrong." Hank rode off, but his question lingered, a reminder that Red Hollow's eyes were watching. As the sun dipped low, painting the prairie in shades of amber, Lena stood on the porch, her shadow long and thin. She hummed a faint tune, off-key but steady, the first sound of her voice that wasn't born of fear. Jesse, mending a harness by the barn, pretended not to hear, but a warmth stirred in his chest, unfamiliar and fragile. Could a broken man and a wounded child find a way to heal, or would the past come knocking before they had the chance? The Texas sun climbed high, its unrelenting glare baking the prairie around Jesse James's ranch. It was late spring of 1874, and the scrubland shimmered, alive with the hum of cicadas and the rustle of dry grass. The ranch, nestled between rocky bluffs, bore the scars of neglect, its barn leaning like a drunkard, its fences patched with mismatched wood. Lena, now 12 and a shade less fragile, moved with purpose across the yard, her auburn curls tied back with a scrap of cloth. Her muslin dress, mended but faded, fluttered as she hauled a bucket of water from the well, her green eyes sharp, scanning the horizon as if it might betray her. Jesse worked nearby, hammering a new post into the fence line, his frayed jacket discarded in the heat. Sweat glistened on his brow, and his gray eyes flicked toward Lena, noting the way she carried herself, wary but steady, like a colt learning to trust its legs. 2 weeks had passed since Red Hollow, and their routine had settled into a quiet rhythm. Lena fed the hens, swept the house, and trailed Jesse's steps, her silence slowly giving way to soft hums and rare questions. But the peace felt fragile, a thin veneer over a world that never stayed kind for long. Dust rose on the road at mid-morning, a faint plume signaling trouble before the sound of hooves reached them. Jesse straightened, his hammer pausing mid-swing, and Lena set the bucket down, her hands tightening around its handle. 3 riders emerged from the haze, their silhouettes stark against the cloudless sky. The first, Reverend Elias Hatch, wore a stiff preacher's collar, his pinched face radiating false piety. Beside him rode Deputy Amos Slater, badge glinting, mustache trimmed too neat for a man of the law in these parts. The third was Caleb Dawes, his black duster flapping like a vulture's wings, his smirk as sharp as the knife at his belt. Jesse stepped forward, wiping his hands on his trousers, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Morning, gentlemen, what brings you?" Lena lingered by the well, her posture rigid, her eyes locked on Caleb. Reverend Hatch dismounted, folding his hands as if in prayer. "Mr. James, we come on a matter of law. The girl, Lena, is claimed as property by Mr. Dawes's family, settled through a wager. You've no legal guardianship." Jesse's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching. "She ain't property. She's a child. I paid $15 to cut her free, not to own her." Deputy Slater leaned forward in his saddle, his hand resting near his holster. "That coin don't change the paperwork, James. She's tied to a debt, legal and binding." Caleb spat into the dirt, his eyes glinting with malice. "My brothers, girl, my claim. You're harboring stolen goods." Lena stepped onto the porch, her bare feet silent on the wood, her green eyes hard as flint. She didn't cower, didn't hide, standing tall despite the tremble in her hands. "I ain't going back," she said, voice low but clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. The men turned, startled by her defiance. Caleb's smirk widened, but Hatch raised a hand, his tone oily. "Lena, child, we'll see you returned. To your kin. This man's done his part." Jesse moved between Lena and the riders, his broad frame a shield. "She stays. You got papers, show 'em. If not, you got 7 days to bring 'em or stay off my land." Slater's eyes narrowed, his fingers twitching. "You're obstructing the law, James. That's a dangerous game." Jesse didn't flinch, his gray eyes cold as winter. 7 days, ride on." Reverend Hatch's lips thinned, but he nodded, mounting his horse. "The Lord disapproves of stubbornness, Mr. James. We'll return." Caleb lingered, his gaze raking over Lena, a predator sizing up prey. "You can't keep what ain't yours, girl," he said, then spurred his horse, dust swallowing the trio as they rode off. Lena's shoulders sagged, but her fists stayed clenched, her breath uneven. Jesse turned to her, his voice steady. "You did good, standing up like that." Lena's eyes met his, a flicker of pride beneath the fear. "They'll come back," she said, not a question but a certainty. He nodded, glancing at the road. "Likely, but we'll be ready." That afternoon he rode to Red Hollow, wiring a letter to a lawyer in Junction Bluff, an old friend who owed him a debt from the war. Papers were a long shot, but Jesse wasn't one to leave a fight to chance. Back at the ranch, he found Lena by the barn, clutching a rusted pitchfork, her face set with determination. "What's that for?" he asked, raising a brow. "If they come early," she said, gripping it tighter. Jesse knelt, his hand gentle on the pitchfork's handle. You don't need to fight yet. But if you want, I'll teach you something. Better. He led her to the yard, pulling an old rifle from the house. Not to shoot, he said, showing her its weight, but to know you ain't helpless. Lena held the rifle, her small hands steady, her green eyes fierce. As dusk fell, painting the bluffs in hues of amber and shadow, Jessie watched her practice, a spark of resolve kindling in her gaze. But with only 7 days before the riders returned, could a man and a child stand against the law and a vengeful past? The Texas prairie shimmered under a late spring sky in 1874, its golden grasses swaying like a restless sea. Jesse James's ranch, a weathered outpost west of Red Hollow, stood defiant despite its crumbling barn and patchwork fences. Lena, 12, moved through the yard with a quiet resolve, her auburn curls catching the midday sun. Her muslin dress, patched but clean, rustled as she scattered corn for the hens, her green eyes softer now, carrying a spark of trust earned through weeks of Jesse's steady kindness. Inside the house, a pot of coffee simmered, its bitter aroma mingling with the scent of fresh-cut cedar from Jesse's morning work. Jesse, 40, leaned against a fence post, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His gray eyes scanned the horizon, wary of the dust clouds that had brought trouble before. 5 days had passed since Caleb Dawes, Reverend Hatch, and Deputy Slater rode off with a 7-day ultimatum, and the weight of their threat hung heavy, like storm clouds gathering beyond the bluffs. Lena sensed it too, her glances toward the road more frequent, her grip on the corn sack tighter. Yet she worked without complaint, her small hands steady, as if proving she belonged. At noon, a new sound broke the stillness, not hooves but the creak of a wagon. Jesse set the knife down, his hand brushing the revolver at his hip. Lena froze, corn spilling from her fingers, her eyes locked on the approaching figure. A woman stepped down, her frame frail under a tattered shawl, her dark hair streaked with gray despite her youth. Her eyes, green like Lena's, were sunken from grief, and her hands trembled as she leaned on a gnarled stick. "Lena," she whispered, voice cracking like dry earth. Lena's breath caught. "Mama." Mara, no older than 30 but worn like driftwood, staggered forward, dropping her stick. Lena ran to her, their embrace a collision of joy and pain. Mara's sobs muffled against her daughter's shoulder. "I thought you were gone," Mara choked, clutching Lena's face. "They took you, and I couldn't." Lena held her tight, tears spilling for the first time since Red Hollow. "I'm here, Mama." Jesse stood back, his throat tight, unsure of his place in this reunion. Mara's gaze met his, gratitude warring with shame. "You're the one who saved her," she said, voice raw. Jesse nodded, words failing him. Mara's story spilled out in fragments, a husband lost to gambling, a debt that sold her to a workhouse, Lena taken as payment. She'd escaped, tracking Lena to Red Hollow only to find her gone. "I heard she was with a rancher," Mara said, wiping her eyes. "I didn't dare hope." Jesse offered water, his voice steady. "She's safe now. But there's trouble coming. Men want her back." Mara's face paled, but Lena's voice cut through, firm. "I ain't going nowhere." By dusk, they set out for Mara's shack, a half-day's ride to Cotton Bend, where she'd scraped together a life. The wagon rattled along a trail flanked by mesquite and sagebrush, Lena and Mara huddled in the back, Jesse guiding Rusty, the mule. The shack emerged at twilight, a lean-to of tin and timber nestled against a rocky ridge, its windmill creaking in the breeze. Inside, a single cot and a table held a few treasures, a chipped cup, a child's drawing of a red house, faded but cherished. Lena traced the drawing, her fingers trembling. "You kept it," she whispered. Mara smiled, weak but warm. "Always." Sleep came uneasy, Jesse outside by the wagon, Lena and Mara sharing the cot. At midnight, a sharp scent woke them. Smoke, not from a hearth, but wild and acrid. Jesse bolted upright, the western ridge glowing orange, flames licking the treetops. "Fire!" he shouted, kicking the shack's door open. Lena scrambled out barefoot, Mara coughing behind her. The blaze roared closer, driven by a dry wind, its heat already searing the air. "It'll hit the canyon by dawn," Jesse said, scanning the ridge. "We gotta move." Lena's eyes darted to the shack. "Mama's things, the drawing, my book." Mara grabbed her arm. "It's not worth it." But Lena's gaze was fierce. Jesse cursed under his breath, then sprinted to the shack, ripping open a trunk. He stuffed the drawing, a small journal, and a bundle of letters into his coat, ash falling like snow as he ran back. "Go!" he yelled, tossing the bundle to Lena. They piled into the wagon, Rusty snorting in panic as Jesse whipped the reins. The fire chased them, a red beast swallowing the ridge, its roar drowning out Mara's sobs. They reached a creek by dawn, the water cold and clear, the fire a distant glow. Lena clutched the drawing, her face streaked with soot, her voice quiet. "It's gone, ain't it, the shack?" Mara nodded, tears falling. Jesse knelt beside them, his coat singed. "Fire takes what's dead, Lena. It don't take what's alive." Lena looked at him, her green eyes searching, and nodded, holding her mother's hand tighter. As they camped by the creek, the first rays of sunlight glinted off the water, casting their shadows long and unbroken. They had each other, but with Caleb's deadline looming, could they protect this fragile family from the storm gathering on the horizon? The Texas prairie stretched boundless under a bruised sky, its grasses whispering secrets to the wind. It was the summer of 1874, and Jesse James's ranch, a weathered sanctuary west of Red Hollow, stood scarred but unbowed. The barn leaned like an old soldier, and the fences, patched with grit and hope, gleamed in the dawn light. Lena, 12, stood on the porch, her auburn curls catching the first rays, her green eyes fierce with a courage forged in fire. Her muslin, dress mended with Mara's careful stitches, fluttered as she clutched a broom, sweeping away the last traces of ash from a night of vengeance. Mara, her mother, worked beside her, her dark hair tied back, her frail frame steadier now, fueled by a love that had outlasted loss. Jesse, 40, surveyed the wreckage from the yard, his gray eyes tracing the charred remains of a fence post, the word thief scrawled in soot on the barn door. Caleb Dawes had come in the night, his torch leaving a wound on the land while they'd been at Cotton Bend. The fire had spared the house, but the message was clear. Lena was still a prize to be claimed. Jesse's hands clenched, his revolver heavy at his hip, but his resolve burned hotter than any flame. He glanced at Lena, her small hands gripping the broom like a weapon, and Mara, her gaze steady despite the fear in her eyes. They were his to protect, not by law, but by something deeper. The 7th day dawned, the deadline set by Caleb and his allies. Dust rose on the road, not from 3 riders, but a dozen, neighbors led by Hank Sutter, his limp no match for his stubborn heart. Wagons creaked with planks, nails, and stew pots, their faces weathered but kind. "Heard you got trouble," Hank said, tossing a sack of tools at Jesse's feet. "Figured we'd lend a hand." Mara hesitated, her shawl drawn tight, but Lena stepped forward, nodding thanks, her voice quiet but sure. "Appreciate it." The community set to work, hammers ringing, laughter weaving through the air, a defiant chorus against the looming threat. By noon, the fence stood taller, the barn door scrubbed clean. Lena hauled water, her arms stronger now, while Mara stirred a pot of stew, her hands trembling less with each shared smile. Jesse drove nails with precision, his heart lighter, with every plank raised. But as the sun climbed, a lone rider appeared, his black duster flapping like a storm cloud. Caleb Dawes dismounted, his smirk ablaze, his eyes locked on Lena. "Nice little party," he sneered, spitting into the dust. "But she's still mine? No papers, no claim." Jesse stepped forward, his voice low, unyielding. "She's no one's property, never was." Caleb laughed, his hand brushing the knife at his belt. "You gonna play hero, James? Marry the widow? Make it legal? A broken man, a half-dead woman, and a feral brat. What a family." Lena dropped the bucket, water splashing, and strode to Caleb, her green eyes blazing. She slapped him, the crack echoing across the yard, silencing the crowd. "You don't talk about my mama," she said, voice steady as stone. "Or Jesse. I ain't yours." Caleb's cheek burned red, his sneer twisting into rage. He raised a hand, but Jesse was there, his grip iron on Caleb's wrist. "Touch her, and you won't ride out." Hank and the neighbors closed in, their tools raised, eyes hard. Caleb's gaze darted, calculating, then fell. He yanked his arm free, mounting his horse. "This ain't over," he spat, but his voice lacked conviction. He rode off, dust swallowing his shadow, leaving only the prairies quiet. That night the ranch glowed under lantern light, the community sharing stew and stories by a crackling fire. Mara sang a lullaby, her voice fragile but warm, and Lena leaned against her, her auburn curls soft in the firelight. Jesse watched, his chair creaking, a weight lifting from his chest. He'd saved Lena from a rope, but she'd saved him from a life half-lived. And Mara's presence wove them into something new, a family not born of blood but of choice. As stars blanketed the sky, Lena handed Jesse a piece of bread, baked with Mara's recipe, its crust golden and warm. "Better than yours?" she teased, a grin breaking through. Jesse chuckled, the sound foreign but welcome. The first laughter since his wife's grave grew cold. Mara's eyes met his, a silent question lingering, but the answer could wait. They had time. In the 1870s, Texas was a land of second chances, where families were forged not just by birth, but by courage and compassion. Lena's story reminds us that love can rebuild what fire and hate destroy, a lesson as true today as it was then. If this tale of redemption touched your heart, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe to join our community of story lovers. Click the bell for more journeys through history's untamed heart. As the fire burned low, Lena looked at Jesse, her voice soft but sure. "We're home, ain't we?" He nodded, the prairie wind carrying their hope into the night. But what would it take to keep this home from the shadows still lurking beyond the horizon?